Le Bernardin Restaurant in Manhattan sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers, filled with the elegant murmur of conversations in multiple languages and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. Wall Street executives in tailored suits and socialites in ball gowns moved with the ease that only old money can afford. It was a Tuesday in March, and the five-star establishment was running with its usual precision. In the most secluded corner of the dining room, a woman in her 60s sat alone at a table for two. Keiko Tanaka wore a modern black silk kimono, her gray hair pulled back into an impeccable bun, and her hands, though slightly tremulous, held a small pearl pendant around her neck. Her every movement radiated the quiet dignity of someone accustomed to power. The whispers had already begun the moment she entered. "She's the CEO of Tanaka Industries," a banker murmured to his companion. "They say she's worth $3 billion and controls half of Tokyo's ports." Other customers watched her discreetly, recognizing the face that often appeared on the covers of Forbes Japan and the Wall Street Journal. But something was different that night. Keiko was not accompanied by her usual entourage of assistants and translators. She had come to New York alone on a business trip that had gone on longer than planned, and now faced an uncomfortable reality. Her English, though functional in prepared corporate meetings, fell apart completely in spontaneous situations. When the sommelier approached with the wine list, Keiko tried to form a sentence, but the words got lost somewhere between her brain and her tongue. "Wine, please," she managed to articulate, her voice laden with an accent that made each syllable almost incomprehensible. The sommelier, an experienced Frenchman accustomed to international clientele, smiled politely, but his eyes betrayed his confusion. "Perhaps Madam would prefer our wine list in English," he suggested, speaking louder as if volume could overcome the language barrier. Keiko shook her head in frustration, pointing vaguely at the menu. Other waiters began to gather, whispering among themselves about how to handle the situation. The atmosphere at the table became increasingly tense. The woman who chaired board meetings on 3 continents was being reduced to silence by a simple wine list. At the back of the room, watching discreetly from the kitchen entrance, was Zara Williams, a 28-year-old waitress who had been working at Le Bernardin for 2 years. Her black and white uniform was impeccable, but her posture revealed the fatigue of someone who had worked a double shift. Next to her, sitting on a small chair near the service station, was her 11-year-old daughter Zara. Zara shouldn't have been there. The babysitter had cancelled at the last minute, and Amara had no choice but to bring her daughter to work, hoping the manager wouldn't notice. The girl was quiet, doing her homework in a worn notebook, occasionally looking up to observe the elegant movement of the restaurant. Amara watched the situation at Keiko's table with growing discomfort. As the only black employee on the waitstaff, she had already faced her share of condescending looks and subtle comments. She knew what it felt like to be invisible in a space where she didn't completely belong. "Mom," Zara whispered, tugging at Amara's uniform sleeve. "Is that lady speaking Japanese?" Amara looked in the direction her daughter indicated. "I think so, honey." "Why?" She looked sad. Like Mrs. Nakamura at the language school when no one understood her. Zara had spent the last 3 years studying Japanese in a free community program in Harlem. What began as a childish curiosity about anime had turned into a genuine passion for the Japanese language and culture. She spoke Japanese more fluently than many adults who had been studying for years. At Keiko's table, the situation was getting worse. The sommelier had called the maitre d', who in turn had called the manager. A small crowd of staff in smart uniforms surrounded the table, all trying to decipher the Japanese businesswoman's gestures and fragmented words. The other customers were beginning to stare openly, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed irritation. Keiko felt her face burn with humiliation. In Tokyo, she was feared and respected. Her words moved markets, and her decisions affected thousands of jobs. But there, in that luxurious restaurant, she was being treated like a confused child who couldn't order a simple glass of wine. "Perhaps you would prefer a restaurant more suited to your level of English," whispered a customer at a nearby table to his companion, loud enough for Keiko to hear. The comment hit her like a slap in the face. That's when Zara rose from her chair. "Mom," she said, her voice small but determined, "can I help?" Amara looked at her daughter, then at the commotion at Keiko's table, and felt her heart race. "Zara, you can't leave here. If Mr. Laurent sees us." "But she needs help," Zara insisted. "I understand what she's trying to say." Amara hesitated. The restaurant's rules were clear. Employees' children were not to interact with customers. But something in Keiko's silent expression of despair touched her maternal heart. Amara made a decision that would change everything. "Stay close to me," she whispered to Zara, and together they approached the table where Keiko was surrounded by confused staff. "Excuse me," Amara said respectfully to the maitre d'. "Perhaps I can help translate." The maitre d', Jean-Pierre Laurent, frowned. "Amara, you should be taking care of your tables, and your daughter shouldn't be here." "I know, sir, but—" Before Amara could finish, Zara stepped forward and bowed politely to Keiko, speaking in perfect Japanese. "Konbanwa, Tanaka-san. Watashi wa Zara desu. Anata o Tasukuru koto ga dekamasu ka." "Good evening, Mrs. Tanaka. I am Zara. Can I help you?" The effect was instantaneous and magical. Keiko looked up, her eyes immediately filling with tears of relief. For a moment, she seemed unable to believe what she was hearing. Then, like a dam bursting, the words flowed from her in fluent, elegant Japanese. "Arigato gozaimasu, chisai tenchi-chan. Watashi wa tadashi I wane o irabatai no desu ga, daremo watashi no kotoba o rikai shite kurmasan." "Thank you very much, little angel. I want to choose a suitable wine, but no one understands my words." The entire room fell silent. Conversations ceased. Forks were suspended in midair. Everyone watched in fascination as the 11-year-old black girl conversed fluently in Japanese with the Asian billionaire, bridging a cultural gap that moments before had seemed insurmountable. Zara listened attentively as Keiko explained her culinary preferences and her experience with wines. Then, turning to the astonished sommelier, she began to translate with the seriousness of a professional interpreter. "Ms. Tanaka would like a dry red wine that complements fish dishes. She prefers French wines from the Burgundy region, specifically a Pinot Noir with earthy notes. She would also like to know if the chef can prepare the salmon with less salt, as she has dietary restrictions." The sommelier blinked several times, processing the information. C'est parfait. I have just the right wine." He quickly walked away, clearly impressed. Keiko gently held Zara's hand and spoke again in Japanese. The girl translated for the assembled staff. "She is thanking you for finally making her feel human again. She said you are very kind, but she felt invisible until now." A heavy silence hung over the group. Jean-Pierre Laurent, who had worked in luxury restaurants for 20 years, had never witnessed anything like this. He looked at Amara, who was visibly nervous, expecting a reprimand. Instead, he bowed slightly to Zara. "Mademoiselle, you saved our evening. Could you continue to assist our special guest?" Keiko, understanding the tone even without comprehending the words, nodded vigorously and said something to Zara, who translated, "She would like me to stay with her during dinner if possible. She has been feeling lonely for days." Amara looked nervously at her supervisor. "Mr. Laurent, I need to work." "Don't worry about your tables tonight, Amara," Laurent said decisively. "This is a special situation. Your daughter is providing an extraordinary service." And so began one of the most magical nights in the history of Le Bernardin. Zara sat next to Keiko, translating not only words but cultural nuances. She explained the dishes on the menu not only in culinary terms but in cultural context, helping Keiko understand not only what she was eating but why it was prepared that way. Keiko, in turn, began to open up. Through Zara, she told the staff about her company, about how she had taken over her father's business at a time when women were not welcome in Japanese boardrooms. She talked about her trip to New York, about how she was trying to expand her business to the United States but was feeling lost and isolated. "She says she has a granddaughter your age in Tokyo," Zara translated at one point, "and that you remind her of her. She misses talking to someone young and smart." As the evening progressed, a small crowd of employees and even some curious customers gathered discreetly around the table, fascinated by the interaction between the girl and the businesswoman. It wasn't just linguistic translation that was taking place, it was a complete cultural translation. When Keiko asked about Zara's life, the girl told her about her school, her Japanese studies, her dreams of visiting Japan one day. Keiko listened with growing attention, occasionally interrupting to ask more specific questions. "She wants to know why you chose to study Japanese," Amara said, approaching the table with a new bottle of water. Zara thought for a moment before responding in Japanese. Keiko smiled for the first time all evening and said something that made Zara blush. What did she say? Amara asked. She said my pronunciation is better than that of many of her American employees, Zara replied, clearly proud. The transformation in Keiko was remarkable. The woman who had entered the restaurant bent over by the weight of incomprehension was now upright, animated, gesturing expressively as she told stories of her business and travels. She had regained her dignity and, more importantly, her voice. When dessert arrived, a delicate chocolate souffle that Zara had helped Keiko choose, the Japanese businesswoman did something unexpected. She opened her Italian leather purse and took out a gold business card, speaking at length in Japanese as she handed it to Zara. What is she saying? Asked Amara, approaching the table with growing curiosity. Zara held the card reverently, her eyes wide. She said this is her personal card. Not her business card, but her personal one, which she only gives to family and very close friends. Keiko continued speaking, her words flowing with growing emotion. She wants me to visit Japan as her guest, Zara translated, her voice trembling with disbelief. She said she has a cultural exchange company and wants to sponsor me to study in Tokyo for a summer. She said that I reminded her of why she started working with educational programs. Amara felt her legs go weak. Zara, is this real? Jean-Pierre Laurent, who had been watching the conversation, approached. Madame Tanaka is very well known here in New York. Her exchange programs are legendary. If she is making this offer, it is completely genuine. Keiko noticed Amara's hesitation and said something kindly to Zara, who translated, she understands that this is a lot to process. She wants to give you her number so you can think about it. She'll be in New York for another week. But the Japanese businesswoman wasn't finished. She turned to Amara and began speaking directly to her, with Zara translating every word. She wants to thank you too, Mom. She said you raised an extraordinary daughter, and that doesn't happen by accident. She said she can see the love and dedication in how you raised Zara. Amara felt tears welling up in her eyes. As a single mother working 2 jobs, she rarely received recognition for what she sacrificed for her daughter. Keiko continued speaking, and Zara translated with growing amazement, she wants to offer you a job too, Mom. She said her company needs people with kokoro true heart. She wants you to coordinate cultural exchange programs here in New York. The entire restaurant seemed to be suspended in time. Other customers had stopped eating to watch this extraordinary transformation happening before their eyes. But I have no experience in international business, Amara murmured. Zara translated the objection, and Keiko responded with a warm laugh. She said that experience can be taught, but kindness and wisdom come from within. She said that any mother who raised such a compassionate and intelligent daughter has exactly the qualities she is looking for. At that moment, something magical happened at Le Bernardin. Other customers began to applaud spontaneously. The sound filled the room, not just for Zara and her impressive translation, but for the moment of genuine human connection they had witnessed. An American businessman at a nearby table stood up and approached them. Sorry to interrupt, but that was extraordinary. I'm the CEO of a software company, and I would be honored to support whatever educational program you are discussing. Other customers followed suit. A woman who identified herself as the director of an educational foundation offered to help with visa documentation. An elderly couple, moved by the scene, said they wanted to contribute to Zara's education fund. Keiko watched everything with growing fascination, commenting in Japanese on how kindness has a ripple effect. She said this is what she calls wa harmony, Zara translated. When one person acts with genuine kindness, it inspires others to do the same. She said tonight proved a theory she has about connecting cultures. As the evening drew to a close, Keiko insisted on paying not only her own bill, but also leaving an extraordinary tip for the entire restaurant staff. She wrote a note in Japanese, which Zara translated for Jean-Pierre Laurent. She said this was the best service she had ever received in any restaurant in the world, not because of the food, although it was excellent, but because you allowed her to be seen as a person, not just a confused tourist. Laurent held the note reverently. Please tell Madame Tanaka that tonight has changed our perspective on true hospitality. Before leaving, Keiko hugged Zara for a long time, whispering something in her ear that made the girl smile radiantly. What did she say? Asked Amara. She said I have a kokoro no hashi, a bridge of the heart, and that people with bridges of the heart are very rare and precious in the world. A week later, Amara and Zara met Keiko in the lobby of the Four Seasons Hotel. The Japanese businesswoman had organized a formal meeting to discuss the details of the exchange program, but when they arrived, they discovered they would not be alone. In the presidential suite, a small meeting was underway. There were representatives from the Tanaka Cultural Foundation, lawyers specializing in educational immigration, and surprisingly, Jean-Pierre Laurent from Le Bernardin. "Mr. Laurent?" Amara said, confused. "What are you doing here?" Keiko replied in Japanese, and Zara translated with a growing smile. She said that night at the restaurant was so special that she wants to document everything. She is creating a program called Bridges of Understanding, and wants Le Bernardin to be the first partner restaurant. Laurent smiled warmly. "Madame Tanaka has proposed something revolutionary. She wants to train our staff in cultural sensitivity and establish special evenings where we celebrate different cultures and languages. We want you and Zara to be our cultural consultants." In the months that followed, Amara and Zara's lives changed completely. Amara left her job as a waitress to become program coordinator for the Tanaka Cultural Foundation in New York. Her first project was to establish cultural exchange programs at 5 high-end restaurants in Manhattan, training staff to recognize and respond appropriately to language barriers. Zara, meanwhile, became a minor local celebrity. Her story was featured in the New York Times, and she was invited to speak at schools about the importance of learning other languages. She began teaching basic Japanese to hotel and restaurant staff, building cultural bridges throughout the city. The following summer, Zara finally made her trip to Japan. Keiko personally welcomed her at the Tokyo airport, and for 2 weeks, Zara lived with the Tanaka family, experiencing Japanese culture from the inside out. "How was it?" Amara asked when Zara returned, clearly transformed by the experience. "Mom, it was like finding a second family I didn't even know existed," Zara replied, her eyes shining with newfound knowledge. "Keiko Oba-san showed me her company, took me to visit ancient temples, and taught me about the Japanese philosophy of omotenashi, hospitality from the heart." Zara had returned with more than just memories. Keiko had enrolled her in a special Japanese studies program that would allow her to spend every summer in Tokyo until she graduated from high school. In addition, she had established an educational fund that would ensure Zara could attend any university she chose. "But most importantly," Zara continued, "I understood that night at the restaurant wasn't just about translation. It was about kokoro wa hiraku, opening hearts. Keiko Oba-san said that when we open our hearts to others, we create possibilities we never imagined." 2 years later, Amara was standing on stage at Lincoln Center, translating for an international conference on cultural tourism. Zara, now 13, was in the audience, proud to see her mother thrive in her new career. The Bridges of Understanding program had expanded to 50 restaurants in New York, 30 in Los Angeles, and was being implemented in London and Paris. The story of an 11-year-old girl who saved an evening with her compassion and language skills had inspired a quiet revolution in the hospitality industry. During a break in the conference, Amara received a video message from Keiko in Japan. The businesswoman was in her office in Tokyo, smiling radiantly. "Watashi no kokoro no musum," she said, "my daughter of the heart," addressing Zara across the screen. "Anata no okijida, watashi wa honto no shiaways wa mitsukamashita." "Thanks to you, I have found true happiness." Zara replied fluently in Japanese, and Amara watched, amazed at her daughter's transformation. The shy girl who once hid in the corners of the restaurant was now a confident young woman who spoke 3 languages and dreamed of becoming an international diplomat. "Do you know what's most amazing about this whole journey?" Zara said to her mother that night as they looked back at photos from their trip to Japan. "What is it, dear?" "It all started because you taught me that when we see someone suffering, no matter who they are, we help them. You never said it with words, but you showed me through your actions every day." Amara hugged her daughter, remembering the nervous waitress who almost didn't let Zara approach Keiko's table. "And you taught me that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths." 5 years after that transformative night at Le Bernardin, Zara Williams stood on a podium at the United Nations General Assembly, at age 16, as the youngest cultural ambassador in the organization's history. She was there to present the Global Bridges Program, an international expansion of the initiative that began with a simple act of translation in a Manhattan restaurant. In the audience, Amara watched with tears of pride, now as Global Director of Cultural Programs for the Tanaka Foundation. At her side was Keiko, who had become more than a mentor. She was truly a second mother to Zara and a sister to Amara. 5 years ago, Zara began her speech in perfect English. I was just a girl doing homework in the corner of a restaurant where my mother worked. Today, I am here because a Japanese woman felt lost in a world that did not understand her, and because my mother taught me that kindness knows no borders. She paused and smiled at Keiko. Keiko Oba-san taught me a Japanese word, ikigai, the purpose of life. She said we find our ikigai when we discover where our talents meet the needs of the world. That night, my small talent with languages met her need to be understood. The audience was completely silent, absorbing every word. But what we discovered next was something much bigger. We discovered that when we build bridges of understanding, we don't just connect two people, we create waves of change that spread across entire communities. Zara went on to present the impressive statistics. The Global Bridges program, now operated in 12 countries, had trained more than 10,000 hospitality professionals in cultural sensitivity, and had created exchange programs for 500 young people from underserved communities. But numbers are just numbers, she continued. The true measure of our success is in the stories. Like that of Chin Wei, a Chinese refugee who now manages cultural programs in San Francisco. Or Maria Santos, a Mexican immigrant who became a cultural ambassador in Spain. Or James Thompson, a young man from Harlem who now studies international business in Tokyo. Keiko stood up to join Zara on stage, followed by Amara. Together, the three women represented something powerful. Proof that cultural and socio-economic differences are not barriers, but opportunities for mutual growth. When we talk about cultural diplomacy, Keiko said in carefully pronounced English, we're not talking about politics or economics. We're talking about kokoro heart. Zara-chan taught me that the best ambassadors aren't politicians in expensive suits, but children with open hearts. Amara took the microphone last. As a single mother who worked multiple jobs to survive, I never imagined I would be speaking at the United Nations. But I have learned that when we invest in our children, not just our own but all children, we invest in the future of the world. After the presentation, there was a reception where delegates from dozens of countries gathered to discuss how to implement similar programs in their nations. Zara circulated around the room, conversing fluently in Japanese with Asian diplomats, in Spanish with Latin American representatives, and in Mandarin with the Chinese delegation. How did she learn so many languages? A French ambassador asked Amara. Curiosity, Amara replied simply. Once you discover the power of connecting with people from other cultures, it becomes addictive. Later that evening, the three women gathered at Keiko's apartment on the Upper East Side, the same apartment where Zara had stayed during her first visits to New York to work with the foundation. You know what's funny? Zara said, sitting on the floor in Japanese style, as Keiko had taught her. That night at the restaurant, I was just trying to help a lady who looked sad. I never imagined it would change our lives. Keiko smiled, pouring green tea into fine porcelain cups. In Zen philosophy, we call this connections of destiny. Some people come into our lives just when we need them, and they need us. Amara took her daughter's hand. What do you want to do after you graduate from high school? Zara thought for a moment. I want to study international relations at Georgetown, then work at the State Department. But not in traditional politics. I want to create programs that connect ordinary people, like waitresses and businesswomen, like single moms and multi-billion-dollar CEOs. She looked at Keiko and Amara. I want every child in the world to know that their voice matters, no matter where they come from or what language they speak. Because if an 11-year-old girl from Harlem can change the life of a Japanese CEO, imagine what we can do when we really start listening to each other. That night, as New York City sparkled through the windows, three women from different cultures and generations sat together, united by a friendship that had been born out of a moment of compassion and grown to change the world. Their story had begun with a simple translation in a restaurant, but it had become something much bigger, proof that when we open our hearts to others, we create endless possibilities. And somewhere in the city, in restaurants and hotels, schools and offices, other bridges were being built, one compassionate conversation at a time, continuing the legacy of a magical night when a girl decided that no one should ever feel invisible in the world. The last thing Keiko said that night in Japanese was something Zara didn't need to translate for Amara, because some truths transcend languages. Ai wa kaku wa koaru, love transcends all boundaries. Amara understood perfectly, not because of the words, but because of the sparkle in Keiko's eyes and her daughter's smile. At that moment, she realized that they had created more than a friendship or a business partnership. They had created a chosen family, united not by blood or nationality, but by something much stronger, the certainty that genuine kindness can change the world. 2 years later, when Zara graduated as valedictorian of her class and received a full scholarship to Georgetown University, she gave her graduation speech in 3 languages. But the part that most moved the audience was when she said, in simple English, "I have learned that we don't have to be big or powerful to make a difference. Sometimes the most revolutionary thing we can do is simply see when someone needs help and have the courage to offer it." Keiko was in the front row, next to Amara, both with tears in their eyes. The 65-year-old Japanese businesswoman had found in the American waitress and her daughter something that all her money could never buy, a real family. And Amara, looking at her extraordinary daughter on stage, knew that that courageous decision to let Zara help a stranger in a restaurant had been the most important moment of their lives. Their story proves that sometimes the most transformative encounters begin with the smallest acts of kindness, and that when we open our hearts to others, we discover that the world is much smaller and much more connected than we ever imagined.